So if we take the sort of regulatory time period as being generally, with some exceptions, generally towards more regulations, which make it harder to build, that's going to be a challenge to affordability, although it's offset by other benefits, perhaps. But New York then has other sets of policies which try to make things more affordable. Most obviously, both public housing and rent control. But let's start with the public housing side. Of course, the key acronym is NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, which begins in 1934, I guess.
That's right.
So can you tell us about that? Why did that come about? What's your, what's it's the broad outline of its history?
And I have to say, once again, we're sort of a first and a pioneer in New York, having the first housing authority in the country and the first public housing development, the first houses, which are now a historic landmark.
Of course they are. Yeah.
On the Lower East Side, and that was, I think, 1935, sort of right after NYCHA was formed. During and then after NYCHA was formed, actually NYCHA was formed before the federal public housing program. And then it really was sort of in the post-war, sort of a few developments were built. It really was during the post-war era. The bulk of public housing was built in New York between 1945 and 1965.
But somewhere north of 1 in 20 New Yorkers live in public housing.
Yes.
So it's
it's about 5% of all the housing stock in New York.
All right. So Robert Moses is again the master builder on this.
And once again, and it was built again. I mean, as a lot of these developments were built in sort of the tower in the park model.
Right.
Also,
so very much of a monoculture, not a mixed use sort of thriving.
No, they look very homogeneous. There's virtually no commercial. They're sort of cut off from the street grid. There's a lot of things not to like about public housing, and right now they're crippling deficits. I mean, the City Housing Authority has basically a structural operating deficit of like 20 to 40 million, and probably another $20 billion in capital repairs that it needs to make. So we've got to do something. I mean, the public housing really is sort of at a crisis point. But I don't think that we should. I actually, I feel pretty strongly. I don't think we should be getting rid of our public housing. I don't think we should be selling it off. It would be. There's some of the public housing developments are on enormously valuable plots of land. So it is a large opportunity cost, but it's also it's providing, aside from obviously the political challenge that's not happening, but I also think it's providing really valuable affordable housing for.
It's helping to keep the city mixed.
Exactly, and helping to actually keep neighborhoods mixed. I mean, that's the thing that I think people don't understand about when we think about public housing around the country. We think of sort of isolated developments that are in extremely poor neighborhoods far away from
Chicago in the old days.
But in New York now, 2/3 of public housing developments are surrounded by block groups with incomes that are above the median, above the New York City median. So what's happened is you've seen a lot of basically gentrification has come into neighborhoods immediately surrounding public housing developments. And so, but for public housing, those neighborhoods would not be integrated. And to the extent we think, and we have new evidence that neighborhood integration, economic integration is beneficial, and that kids who grow up in more integrated environments do better later in life, from the Moving to Opportunity experiment. I feel like this is, maybe ironically, that public housing actually is delivering that kind of integration.